Good morning. Whenever I talk about comparative religion, as I'm going to today, about Buddhism and its parallels to unity, I kind of chuckle to myself at something that I read a few years ago. It's entitled, "Let Them Eat Cake," which as a French teacher, of course, caught my attention because Marie Antoinette supposedly said that. She didn't, by the way. Well, enough with the French history lesson, and on with "Let Them Eat Cake." Catholicism says, "Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's cake." Protestantism maintains, "You can't have your cake and eat it too," which means if you eat all your cake, there's nothing left to eat. I never understood that. Atheism says, "There's no such thing as cake." Taoism says, "The way to have cake is to eat cake." Zen Buddhism says, "What is the sound of cake baking?" TV evangelism says, "You can have all the cake you want, just send money." Tibetan Buddhism says, "Cake is." Judaism says, eat your cake already." Hinduism says, "Have your cake, just don't have a cow." Well, out of that religion that worships cows, which we talked about last week, Hinduism, tumbled Buddhism about 2,500 years ago. Unlike Hinduism, but like Christianity, Buddhism was founded by a particular person, Siddhartha Gautama, whose birthday was yesterday, who became the Buddha. Siddhartha became Buddha, much like Jesus became the Christ. And similar to Jesus Christ, who taught the importance of love, Buddha spent much of his time teaching about compassion and the practical importance of having compassion in our lives. Having compassion or love, for example, leads to forgiveness, empathy, a sense of oneness with all life and our fellow human beings, a far healthier state than the ego separation and fear of others that seems to be sort of the prevailing view in the West. Some of the Buddhist tools for self-transformation in this regard are very useful and can help us connect to some of the eternal laws that all legitimate religions teach. These eternal laws help us live better lives on a higher level than on the illusory plane of relative reality where most of us are stuck a great deal of the time. Some of these relative plane values, like survival of the fittest, buyer beware, all's fair in love and war and business, just flat cause grief to us and to the world. We, being members of a center of practical spirituality, would rather live in what is referred to as heaven on earth. It's a happier, healthier, and more humane way to live, and I might add, especially more humane to ourselves. It's a life with no stress, negativity, or fear. It's a miraculous life. In the abiding by the eternal laws produces that. Jesus said, "I came that ye shall have life and have it more abundantly." One of the things we do here is study how we can manifest that abundance. What Buddhism gives us are some specific tools to help have life more abundantly by dispelling ignorance and helping us see through some of the illusions that enslave us, that create stress, fear, and negativity, which damage our physical health and our emotional health. My favorite example, as you probably know, is the man walking through the woods who has a snake phobia. He sees the stick in his path. He projects his fear of snakes onto the stick, and is terrified and has a heart attack and dies due to his fear. Buddhist tools can help alleviate that kind of misconception that we are continually projecting onto our lives. For example, we often react emotionally to what someone says to us, not to mention what we project into their meaning. The absolute reality is that we are reacting to a bunch of sound waves being emitted from something that we in English call a mouth. That's all it is. What they say is the stick in the road. What makes a snake out of it, of course, is us. Sure, on the relative plane, that person may be having a bad day or verbalizing some neurotic stuff, but in reality, it has nothing to do with us. Maybe what we symbolize for them at that moment, but not really about us. Buddhist tools are psychological ways to understand ourselves and thus start working to eliminate those parts of us that cause us trouble, like thinking that life out there is doing a number on us instead of realizing that we create our reality. A fundamental unity idea. We create our reality. It also expresses the very first lesson in the Course of Miracles. Nothing has any meaning except the meaning that we give to it. So in unity, Buddhism and the Course of Miracles, to mention but a few, dealing with our thoughts, they help us see how to do this, and that is very critical. So how do we do that? Again, the Buddhists have some really handy tools. Buddhism's most famous tools, of course, are the Four Noble Truths. Life is suffering, there's a cause of suffering, there's an end of suffering, and there's a path. The Eightfold Path, which is a kind of Cliff's Notes version of some of the eternal laws. Now, the first noble truth, that life is suffering, simply means that we can be living a joyful, peaceful, and fulfilling life, but that most of the time, most of us are not. If we're running around avoiding suffering with frenetic activity, drugs, alcohol, or other forms of escape and denial, we'll realize, if we're not doing that, we will realize that we aren't in that blissful state called enlightenment, that we could be in, and that we're supposed to be in. Accepting our suffering is good, because then we can start figuring out why we suffer, and we can end it. The Buddhists say that suffering is 100% caused by us. Cause of suffering, us. Our ignorance, for example, about the way things really are, incorrect thinking, incorrect acting, etc. It's not the world out there doing a number to us. We're doing it to ourselves. Just like Unity says, it's within our power to stop our suffering. The Buddhists and Unity agree that we create our world. We create our lives by the very way that we think and then how we project that thinking out there, due to, of course, our thinking. That can't be repeated enough. We're sometimes like a paranoid schizophrenic who, due to schizophrenic's faulty thinking, they're always projecting their fears out there and then reacting to their fears and creating misery for themselves. They are convinced that everyone, including their psychiatrists, their own mothers, even God, is out to get them. Buddhists simply say that we are the cause of our suffering. Therefore, we can end it by learning to see through the illusions and our ignorance. You know, the first thing a psychiatrist does when they encounter a paranoid schizophrenic is to say, "You are Joe Smith. I am your psychiatrist. I'm here to help you." And just repeat it, because on some level, that person, the patient, knows deep down inside that that's the truth. So dispel ignorance. Remember the story? Y'all know how I love this one too, of the old man who lived in Arkansas, wise old man, and every new arrival that came to his hometown asked him about what the people were like there and what the town was like. And the wise old man would always say, well, what were they like in your last town? And they'd say, oh, they were just horrible. The town was terrible. I couldn't wait to get out of there. And the wise old man would say, I'm really sorry to tell you, but that's just the way this place is too. And if the newcomer would say, oh, I hated to leave that place. It was so wonderful. The people were so friendly and nice and loving, and oh, they were wonderful. And the wise man would answer, you've hit the jackpot, because we're like that too. So the wise man knew that we take our reality with us wherever we go. So the second noble truth, the cause of suffering, clearly tells us that we are the cause of our suffering, our thinking. So the third noble truth, the end of suffering, is when we get in touch with precisely what in our thinking is causing us to suffer and to start dealing with it. Maybe our anger or our pride, hatred, jealousy, greed, aversion for whatever, for example. It's when we start seeing that the snake in the road doesn't exist. It's a stick. Maybe to help our thinking, we need to get healthier physically. Maybe we need to get healthier emotionally. Maybe eating right. Maybe we need to meditate more, end stress, exercise more so we can cure depression or increase energy. Maybe we need to spend more time with others on our spiritual path so that we can grow faster spiritually, what the Buddhists call the Sangha. Most of all, we need to re-examine our whole thought system, which can be rather complicated and mostly involves unlearning crazy ideas that don't work, but which the Buddhists are masters at doing. Buddhism is not a religion in the traditional sense because it is not theistic. Buddhism is to the West a psychology, and a very well-developed one of help for every psychological need. And like spending time with a psychiatrist, it can ease our suffering. There are tools for freeing us from much that causes us to suffer by understanding it better, the result being a happier life and a freer life. If we think the stick is in our path, we don't continue our journey. And that brings us to the fourth noble truth, the eightfold path. Right understanding, right thought, right speech, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right conduct, and right concentration. Right understanding means understanding what is truly important in life. The eternal laws, for example. The most important being that all life is one. We're all one, interconnected in God. Unity co-founders Charles and Myrtle Fillmore were very familiar with Buddhist ideas, and on this point they were in complete agreement with the Buddhists. We start every Sunday service by saying there is only one presence and one power in the universe, and that is God, the omnipotent. In other words, everything is one. Everything is interconnected. We are everyone else. Just think about it. The Buddhist belief in the oneness of all life was around some 2,500 years before quantum physicists arrived at exactly the same conclusion. Buddhists considered it an absolute truth, the acceptance of which would help us avoid all kinds of suffering. If we know that we're connected to everything and everyone in the world, it's going to profoundly affect how we treat our fellow human beings, animals, the environment. Maybe as this idea spreads, I certainly hope a new generation of young people will start choosing professions that help the world instead of choosing self-serving jobs or positions in companies that exist only for the purpose of making money, even if it means harm to others. When you think about it, most of the suffering in the world is due to people believing that we are all separate individuals and that we can cheat and kill and take advantage of others without it affecting us. That's about as logical as thinking that we can pollute our environment and still have clean air to breathe and pure water to drink. Just talk about having your cake, not being able to have your cake and eat it too, huh? Just think what the world would be like if everyone understood that all life is one. No wars, no crime, no hunger, probably few mental health problems, and little suffering. So what did the Buddhist monk say to the hot dog vendor? Give me one with everything. Make me one with everything. Second on the Eightfold Path is right thought, determining to live correctly and not entertain unhealthy and incorrect points of view, like condemning others in our hearts. Right speech, avoiding slander, gossip, lying, and all sorts of untrue and abusive speech. Right livelihood, not working at jobs that force you to cause harm to others, like selling arms or intoxicants. Right mental attitude or effort, making efforts. Avoid negative thoughts, make efforts to avoid negative emotions such as anger, jealousy, judgment, and negativity. Right mindfulness, keeping your mind on your spiritual goal. One reason for this is that the Buddhists believe in reincarnation, like we do at Unity, like the Fillmores did. If we don't stay mindful, we're liable to wander off into more worldly pursuits and live in a way that is contrary to eternal laws. Not only will this cause us suffering now and in this life, like if we steal or kill, we'll end up in prison. If we cheat and lie, we won't have any friends. But long term, we'll have to reincarnate to learn the lesson again. Another parallel of Buddhism and unity, the belief then in reincarnation. They certainly have that in common. The difference is that the Fillmores believed that we only reincarnated as humans, whereas the Buddhists believe we can reincarnate also as animals. And I couldn't find anybody to verify that with, so we'll just have to take it at that. Right conduct. We all know in our hearts what generally that means, right conduct. No stealing, killing, sexual misconduct, using others to their detriment, etc. Included also is not slaughtering animals, even to eat. Because of their belief in the interconnectedness of all life, Unity co-founders Charles and Myrtle Fillmore adhered to this Buddhist belief too. They were vegetarians. Thou shalt not kill. They walked the talk. For over 40 years, from the late 19th century till the 1930s, Charles Fillmore wrote passionately about the physical, mental, social, and spiritual harmfulness of eating animals and the necessity of a plant-based life for anyone serious about developing spiritual maturity and contributing to world peace. He and his wife Myrtle were conscientious vegetarians and encouraged their students to be too. Charles's writing on this subject has been rather neglected, but it's very easy to read a lot about this aspect of the Fillmore's teaching. Just a little food for thought. And the last of the Eightfold Path is right concentration, primarily using meditation to reach the highest levels of enlightenment. When you look into the eyes of the Buddhist monks who will be visiting us here at Unity on June 1st and June 6th, you will see the results of years of meditation. They know that you and they are one. They question everything, and they think even things that from childhood they've assumed were true. They question it. They meditate on it, even things they learned in the monastery. It's one of the interesting things about the Buddhists. And they endeavor in certain kinds of meditation to understand the absolute level of life and not be so hypnotized by this relative plane. The point, of course, is to relieve suffering caused by many of our prejudices, our programming, our parent tapes, to use a transactional analysis term. Buddhist meditation is more a tool for self-understanding and self-transformation. They often meditate, for example, on the characteristics of a certain god, like the green Tara god of compassion, in order to incorporate these attributes into their own lives. It's much easier to deal with emotions that cause us suffering if we take the time to understand where they came from and why we keep hanging on to them. It's much easier to love and have compassion for others, for example, when we realize that often the reason that we don't feel those positive, healthy emotions is because we're afraid. Afraid, for example, of rejection or getting taken advantage of. We keep thinking the stick in the path is a snake, and think of all the happiness that we are robbed of when we can't love and when we can't get in touch with our compassionate side. Meditation can help us understand our programming better and thus get free of it and see through life's illusions or maya. Jesus, too, tried to free us from things which ruin our joy and peace, such as pride and prejudice, judging others by worldly standards, and faith in the material world over the absolute world, the kingdom of heaven. Through meditation, we can begin to dispel ignorance and see through illusions. Now, the Eightfold Path, of course, is similar to the Ten Commandments in that they represent wisdom that keeps us from suffering by helping us to avoid certain pitfalls that create chaos in our lives. At the same time, they help create a more peaceful world, which reduces suffering in our lives and in everybody else's lives, which of course comes back to affecting us. Just think how little suffering there would be if everyone in the world observed the Ten Commandments and the Buddhist Eightfold Path. No crimes, wars, poverty, substance abuse, much happiness. Actually, the Eightfold Path reminds me a lot of the 12 powers of Charles Fillmore. Wisdom, understanding, will, order, zeal, elimination, strength, life, for example. But that's another lesson. I hope that this truth lesson has helped you put a few more tools in your spiritual toolbox so that you can better free yourself of some of the obstructions that prevent you from accessing the wonderful life that you so deserve. And I hope that you will join us when our Buddhist visitors go into more detail about these Buddhist teachings on Wednesday, June 1st in the evening, and Tuesday, June 6th at 7 p.m. I honestly think the Fillmores would have been first in line for these rare events. Just think how difficult it was for them to access these teachings that they were so interested in. Until 1959, Tibetan monks like these were hidden away in some monastery in the Himalayan mountains in Tibet. And here we have them coming here personally to Unity to teach us. One of them is even a reincarnated Lama, the one who will be participating in the Tibetan spiritual debate. We have so much to be thankful for in this day and age, and especially here at Unity. Amen.